What are some examples in the real world of the butterfly effect? Small actions triggering something massive. We eat with forks because Confucius didn't like sharp utensils at the table. Confucian thought it's unsightly and inappropriate to have anything remotely violent at the table. Cutting the food is too violent, and having sharp utensils at the table is like having weapons. This all invites disharmony, and Confucius doesn't mess with that. China really likes to do what Confucius thought. As a result, Chinese cuisine evolves in such a way that all the cutting happens in the kitchen, away from the table. Noodles become a thing, and chopsticks work really well with this bite-sized cuisine. Now be Italy. You just got this crazy noodle thing, and so you were eating them with chopsticks because that's how the inventors did it. But then you think, what if I used metal sticks instead? They last longer, and you love it. You love it so much that you start using 3 sticks at a time because it's even easier to eat noodles that way. Then you think, what if you put all the sticks on the end of another stick? You do, and it's so much easier to hold you can't even. So, Italy, you become this nation of weirdos with a brand new utensil. But you're not just any Italian now. You're Caterina de' Medici. Her family's loaded, like owning cities loaded, like bribing the Vatican loaded. You know who isn't loaded right now? France. So instead of just being a rich lady with a rich guy husband, your dad makes you a marriage alliance with a nation-sized dowry, and now you're a queen of France. France is a big deal. French court is a big deal. You're now the biggest deal in Europe when it comes to social matters. You like forks. You make everyone in your court learn to eat with them. Remember how you're a big deal? Yeah. So now everyone in Europe likes forks. Germany likes the forks, but not as much as everyone else. They're kind of clunky and huge. So some Germans came up with a better fork design, with more tines. And it's super compact, and everybody loves it. All the Europeans make their forks this way now, and it spreads to their colossal number of colonies. All because Confucius didn't like sharp utensils at the dinner table. Italy's like, hold my pasta, and invents the fork by playing Jenga with metal sticks. Story 2. Okay, maybe not a small action, but an instance of the butterfly effect nonetheless. August 1945, at the tail end of World War II, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan were devastated. This, of course, causes a deep economic depression in Japan, to match the deep craters in the ground where cities once stood. For years, Japan tries to get back on its feet, but the economy is so bad that not only having living conditions in general deteriorated, but nobody has any drive to try improving things because there is virtually no such thing as entertainment in post-World War II Japan, and what little there is very expensive and cannot be afforded by most of the population, who can barely even afford rice to feed themselves. Japan is in a deep state of depression, not only a financial one, but an emotional one. Enter Osamu Tezuka. In 1952, Tezuka decided to create a comic to entertain the Japanese public in order to make them happy enough to work to get Japan back on track. He creates Tetsuwan Atom, known as Astro Boy in the West, and prints it on the cheapest, lowest quality paper with the cheapest, lowest quality ink in order to sell it for dirt cheap so that the poor Japanese public can afford it. It became a massive success. It gets Japan out of its emotional depression and partially gets it out of its economic one and spawns dozens of imitators over the next few years, who largely try and imitate Tezuka's art style in order to cash in on the popularity of Tetsuwan Atom. This forms the basis of the Japanese manga, comic industry, and later spawns animated adaptations of many of these manga, known as anime. The industry continued to grow and continued to encourage Japanese people to work hard so they could buy the ever-popular comics, which caused a massive economic boom over the next few decades. And today, Japan is the go-to place for technology, video games, and, of course, their wacky anime and manga. Don't forget, Astro Boy's art style was influenced by Tezuka's love for Donald Duck. Henceforth, all Japanese animated characters have enormous eyes. Story 3. The passing of Jeremy Clarkson's mother. Clarkson's mom passed away, which caused him to become upset and irritable, resulting in his wife and himself getting a divorce. The passing and divorce he experienced made him worse, to the point where he released his frustration as producer. That, in turn, gave the BBC a distraction from the criminal they had working for them and keep that out of the public eye. They fired Clarkson. Since Clarkson was the most important part of Top Gear, Hammond, May, and the majority of the crew followed Clarkson out. Top Gear was one of the highest-rated, most-watched shows on television, and one of the BBC's biggest profit centers. Millions of people were upset with the BBC in the first place. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. The BBC began to lose credibility and viewership in both their shows and new programs, so they began spewing nonsense about immigration and whatever else they could find that was controversial enough to increase the revenue to make up for Top Gear. This caused the British public to get angry at the EU for trying to force dangerous immigrants on UK soil, causing them to have a vote. Thanks to the BBC spewing, the vote passed and the UK will now leave the EU. Time for the future. An already scorned Scotland and frustrated Northern Ireland will vote to secede from the UK, likely staying within the EU. The pound will continue to fail until it's far less valuable than freedom money. In a desperate attempt to regain economic surety, the UK, now just England and Wales, will petition to rejoin the EU. The EU will politely but firmly tell them to shove it up their back. The UK will get even more desperate. Since they can't join the EU, they're going to take over EU territory. They start by invading Scotland and regaining that territory. They then attempt to take back Ireland, but realize that another island is useless to them, so they sail across the channel to invade and occupy France. France rolls over, as per usual, and the UK then becomes England, Wales, and France. The EU is furious and World War III begins. Since the United States is super good friends with the UK, they join their side. The rest of the EU is against them. Australia is barbecuing. The UK is trying to keep their territory in France while fighting to the east and simultaneously slowly taking over Spain and parts of Portugal. The whole world is distracted by what is happening in Europe, and that makes criminals mad and gives them an opportunity to strike. Player 3 has arrived. Criminals start blowing things up, turning Europe into Swiss cheese, ironically avoiding Switzerland altogether. Criminals gain so much of a foothold in Eastern Europe that the EU, UK, and America finally stop fighting each other and turn their attention to criminals. After 6 years of fighting, the criminal group is destroyed, and Europe is wounded but unified. Due to giving so much support against the criminal group and helping to restore Europe's territory, the EU permits the re-entry of the UK, with the condition that they give back France. They comply. The UK, wanting to thank the US for their help, gives the US Wales in order to give the US a domestic port for trade in European soil. Wales becomes the 51st state. With the destruction of the criminal group, peace begins to be restored in the Middle East, with Western democracy adopted in Saudi Arabia. The whole world enters the most peaceful and prosperous era in all of human history. Trump is elected for his third term. Story 4. I randomly decided to tutor kids from refugee backgrounds every Saturday morning at this school near my house. Completely on a whim with no real pre-thought, I started helping these 2 Tibetan girls who chose me specifically. They just arrived in Australia as their parents were terminated in their country and came here to live with their grandma. The grandma didn't speak a lot of English, and neither did they. They were quiet, shy, and struggling to learn, which is understandable due to the stress and trauma they had gone through, as well as the fact they're now in a random country whose language they don't understand. I made a point to not only help with their homework, but also buy them nice things here and there, as I knew the grandma couldn't afford it. Just things like trendy trainers, brand items, etc., so they dressed like everyone. I'm a young professional female in my mid or late 20s, and they were teens. So I just get them whatever was trending at their school so other kids at school thought they were cool. It wouldn't even cost that much, as they would really take care of whatever I got them, so it would last for ages. A few years later, they taught their class, have lots of friends, and are very outgoing. They have now both been accepted into medical school. When they graduated high school, they bought me a present and gave it to me with their grandma. The grandma hugged me and was crying, saying I'm what gave those girls life and confidence, and she would be eternally grateful. I didn't realize giving up just 1 hour of my week and buying kids a few things here and there would literally change the course of their lives so dramatically. Story 5. It was the Dallas Stars versus the Edmonton Oilers in 2007. Dallas is leading by a goal with seconds left, and Patrick Stefan has the puck on his stick facing an empty net as the Oilers pull the goalie for an extra attacker. As he's about to shoot, 2 feet from the net, the puck flips on him. Stefan loses control, falls down at the corner, and pushes the puck back. There's 8 seconds left. The Oilers get it down the ice and they score at the other end with 2.1 seconds left. The Oilers still lost the game in OT, but in the NHL, a team that loses in OT gets a point out of the game. That point would be costly. Jump a few months later, and the Chicago Blackhawks and the Oilers are tied in points for 5th last place, but the Oilers won more games, so Chicago gets 5th last. Why is 5th last important? Let's go to the draft lottery. The draft lottery at the time was a lottery where 14 teams enter, and the winning team goes up in that year's draft 4 spots. Since then, it has changed. The odds are weighted to have the team who was last to have the best odds of winning the lottery, and so on. Chicago won the draft lottery that year and got to pick first overall in that year's draft. They got Patrick Kane. Patrick Kane is currently a 3-time Stanley Cup champion, scoring the cup-winning goal in 2010 and one of the NHL's elite goal scorers in the Chicago Blackhawks. What happened to the Oilers? They haven't made the playoffs at all since then, and they have been one of the NHL's worst teams season after season. If Patrick Stefan, the first overall pick himself, albeit one of the biggest busts in the NHL draft, scored in that empty net, or if he didn't push the puck back, Edmonton would have been alone at 5th worst. They would have won the lottery. I think they do a lot nowadays. Patrick Kane would be an Oiler, and Edmonton might be a better team. The best part of that butterfly effect is that gaffe is so infamous, yet not many people know of the final result. Story 6. I met the mother of my children because a friend of mine told me to stop staying in and go to the bar because you can at least talk to someone. I picked this particular bar at random. Texted my friend I was going to leave in 5 minutes if I didn't meet anyone interesting. She walked in as I was about to leave. We only dated for a few weeks before I called it off. A month or two later, I was supposed to go rock climbing with a group on spring break. I couldn't get anyone to watch my cat, so I sat at home. I randomly decided to go to another bar this time, and thought I recognized someone there but thought nothing of it. I go outside to smoke, and when I come back in, that girl asks if I'm name redacted, and I said yeah. She says that she and my girlfriend are there, and I go and look for her, and we hit it off. Again, I made a baby within a month. Unbeknownst to me, she saw me walk in the bar right away and pointed me out, saying not to let me know she's there, and hid up front. She was embarrassed because I broke up with her. Had her roommate not taken the gamble and guessed she still liked me, and not gone up to me, I probably wouldn't have seen her that night and we wouldn't be together, with one kid and another on the way. Story 7. My father enlisted in the Army early in 1942. A couple of years later, he was still one of the massive majority of servicemen not in combat. Not out of danger, however. He was stationed at a stateside Army Air Corps training base. One morning, he was going on guard duty. The guards were mustered in an L-shaped formation. Weapons were to be carried with a chamber empty but a full magazine of live ammo inserted. Some inadequately trained individual messed up. They were supposed to lock the slide back on their .45 automatic, verify that their chamber was clear, drop the slide, pull the trigger to drop the hammer, then insert a loaded magazine. This guy inserted the magazine, dropped the slide, and pulled the trigger. He terminated the man standing next to my father on the other leg of the L formation, a fraction of an inch in the direction the weapon was pointing, or one guy with a last name lower in the alphabet than mine going in sick call, and I wouldn't be here. Story 8. This one time I was visiting my girlfriend at the time in Switzerland for a vacation I was taking from uni. The day I left to go back to the airport, I had arrived about 8 hours too early to take the flight back to the UK. I had seen in the flight schedule screen that there was a flight scheduled 6 hours from the time I was there, saving me 2 hours. I already had my printed ticket with me, but thought I would give it a try and board the plane that was 6 hours earlier. Boarding time. I walk up to the counter, they stamp my ticket, I go through security, and the second counter is before the plane also checks it and lets me through and onto the plane. At this point, I was surprised how this was even possible. I find my seat and pretend to take a nap in hopes that the flight would just take off and be on its way. Almost a couple of hours pass and I'm woken up by one of the flight attendants asking me, "Are you Mr. David?" I replied, "Yes." She asked to see my ticket and asked, "Do you know you're on the wrong plane?" Of course, I played dumb and asked, "If I'm on the wrong plane, how am I on it?" Note that 2 hours had passed. Being on the plane not moving, the air hostess asked and checked to see the tickets of every single person in the flight and left me until the very last one so that they wouldn't disturb me while I slept. She apologized to me and said it was the airport's fault and I'm not to be held responsible. So I took my backpack from the airplane and walked down with the hostess, only to find a private cart waiting to escort me to my original flight, which was already running late to take off. I get on the flight, only to be greeted with all the passengers in the plane clapping their hands in dismay at my delayed arrival. Once I had arrived in the UK, I took a look at the flight schedule, and over 90% of it was all in red with delayed right next to it. Not completely sure it was all connected to the delay I caused in Switzerland, but I had a good feeling it was. I'd never seen any flight schedule with so many delays in my life. A part of me knew that I had caused thousands of people from all over the world to get delayed and caused a butterfly effect of butterfly effects. So he accidentally became the most powerful person in aviation, single-handedly controlling flight schedules with a nap. Story 9. I'm late to the party, but whatever. So about a year and a half ago, I got a flat tire. I had to replace that with a donut that was in my trunk. I couldn't afford a new tire right away, so I drove in that for a while, like for a couple months, till the donut blew out. The day that the donut blew out, I actually was on my way to this cheap used tire place that I go to all the time. The guy that works there calls himself Cheez-It. When I went to pay $40 for my new used tire, Cheez-It said it would give me a new donut for $10. That's an awesome deal, but for some reason I turned it down so I could keep $10. Fast forward around 8 months. A little background here, I work nights at a warehouse. 7 p.m. to 3:30, Sunday to Thursday. I'm also always strapped for cash, living paycheck to paycheck. I'm on my way home from work Thursday morning, barely pulled out of the parking lot, and I notice my rear passenger side tire is flat while I'm driving. I pull over and look at it, and it's already pretty shredded, and I know that my blown out donut's still in my trunk. I couldn't call for a tow because I had no cash till Friday, so I very slowly drove around 7 miles home in the streets, the tire tread slapping the side of my car. I eventually got home and got a ride from a friend to work the next day and got the tire and donut replaced that weekend. Fast forward a week and a half. It's Wednesday. On my way to work, I go to turn into the parking lot and I lose all the pressure on my brakes. I'm able to make it to a parking spot with the help of my emergency brake. I called my wife as soon as I got there and told her I would need a ride home. That night before I left, I was looking at the same tire and there was brake fluid all over the ground around that tire. I had to leave the car there for a few days, and after I got paid that Friday, a friend and I went to see if we could fix the problem. Turns out that when I drove the shredded tire home, it rubbed on my brake line, and after almost 2 weeks, it finally gave out. We ended up getting it fixed, but it was all because I didn't purchase a $10 donut a year ago. Story 10. My stepdad was in the Army National Guard, and he worked in M1A1 tanks as a day job. One day, a coworker asked him for help finishing up a job in a tank. He obliged and ended up having the hatch fall on his neck, injuring him greatly. He was medically retired, and through a course of events, we were pretty much kicked out of the house we lived in, forcing us to be transient for a couple months. Until we stayed with his sister who lived in a different country. We ended up getting an apartment in that same town, and as the stupid things with workers' comp and disability and all that made us really poor. We barely got by as a family. Lots of foodless days. Anyway, I ended up growing in this town we moved to and so very much hated. Graduated high school there, started college, and met my husband. I joined the Navy and we moved out of state, where we decided to stay. My parents still live there, as does my brother, who also met his wife in the town we moved to. If my stepdad never helped this guy, he wouldn't have gone hurt and we wouldn't have moved to the town that we did. Our lives would have gone in very different directions. It's not a good or bad thing, just how life is sometimes. I'm pretty sure my stepdad and my mom would go back and change it if they could, but I think my brother and I are happy with how our lives turned out. Story 11. This one is tragic, but a butterfly effect nonetheless. I have to keep some details vague. I was loss prevention at my old job, and on a day off or after one of my shifts, some substance user couple came in, loaded up a car with over $1,000 worth of stuff and ran out the door with it. The employees, or should know, did not do anything about shoplifters except notify me if they see something. For some reason, one of the cashiers decided to call the cops, and the cops caught them down the road. The cops took the merchandise into custody as evidence and wanted us to pick it up the next day. The LP manager was going to pick the merchandise from the police station and wanted another employee to go with him. Another manager called him and told him to go with the LP manager, and they were going to the police station. The employee asked why they were going, and the manager said he will find out when he comes up front. The employee had a criminal record, and for some reason, he thought he was going to go back to prison. He grabbed a weapon and went to the restroom and harmed himself. Eventually, the LP manager found him, and the employee said he can't go back to prison, and he passed away. If that cashier would have followed the rules and not called the cops, the other employee would still be alive. Don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming the cashier, and there was no way anyone could have predicted the outcome. It's just mind-boggling to look at how one seemingly small and inconsequential action leads to another person ending it all. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 12. A ship of Cuban immigrants sinking leads to America invading Iraq. Such examples are common in history, but this is so vivid and unpredictable that I have to mention it. November 21st, 1999, A boat carrying a dozen Cuban immigrants trying to get to Miami sank. Two of the passengers were a young boy named Elian Gonzalez and his mother, Elizabeth. Elian survived the sinking, but his mother did not. If he had drowned or if she had survived, most of us would never have heard of the story, but he survived and was rescued by fishermen and brought to Miami. At this point, the story becomes an international incident. Elian was taken in by relatives in Miami, but his father still lived in Cuba and wanted him back. What would usually be a simple custody issue, which the father would almost certainly win, was complicated by 50 years of Cuban-American relations. The large Cuban-American population in Miami has extremely negative feelings toward the Castro government in Cuba. To them, including Elian's relatives, sending the child back to Cuba was unthinkable. But the law pretty clearly gives parental rights to the father. The U.S. government ordered that Elian be returned to his father. Elian's American relatives refused. The situation, while technically peaceful, was incredibly volatile and could turn ugly at a moment's notice. The Border Patrol sent in an armed team to storm the house and take Elian back. No one was hurt, but armed government agents storming a home to seize a child played very badly in the media. This incident gave then-President Clinton a serious political black eye, particularly among Cuban Americans, which group is largely concentrated in Florida. It just so happened that it was an election year, and Clinton's vice president, Al Gore, was running to replace him. Clinton's political troubles ended up being passed on to be his would-be successor. The 2000 election was one of the closest in U.S. history. The U.S. electoral system is set up so that whoever wins a state gets all the votes for that state. Florida is a big state, and its votes ended up deciding the election. Al Gore ended up losing the state by an incredibly thin margin, in an election that remains highly controversial, which means that George W. Bush became the 43rd president of the United States. It's highly likely that, had the Elian Gonzalez incident never happened, Al Gore would have been president. The consequences of a presidential election are numerous, but there are some very clear ones in this case. Less than a year into Bush's first term, the World Trade Center was destroyed by both Republicans and Democrats agree that Gore would have responded differently to the attacks. Naturally, Republicans insist he would have done much worse. Democrats insist he would have done much better. Most obviously, while Gore might have still attacked Afghanistan, it's a near certainty he wouldn't have invaded Iraq. So had Elian's boat not sank or had his mother survived, Saddam Hussein would still be in power. 4,500 Americans and 100,000 Iraqis would still be alive. Several hundred billions of dollars would not have been spent and ISIS would likely not exist. At the same time, President Obama was elected primarily in response to the unpopularity of the Bush administration, so there's no way of knowing who would be in the Oval Office now. A single human passing is more than a flap of a butterfly's wings, but the consequences of it are enormous. Story 13. On October 7th, I was due to take a German exam. I was ill the entire week and thus missed the exam. I was told I'd retake it after the autumn holidays since there was not enough time left before the holidays to organize it. On October 15th, 2011, I was leaving a hotel in San Francisco with my family when I decided to run back in to get myself a lollipop from the bowl at the reception. As a result, I had to rush back to the cab to the airport. Because of the rush, I stuffed my phone into my backpack. In fact, I stuffed it so deep I thought I'd lost it. A week later, on October 22nd, I found the phone in my backpack. I charge it and turn it on. My teacher had written me an email. The exam is scheduled for the first day after the vacation, 8. We can also push it up one day, but you need to write back by 20th October. As a result, I had to take the German exam jet-lagged and when it would have been a PE normally. I finished slightly early and went to PE, but I just sat down by the side. A friend of mine I'd had a fight with just before the holidays had sprained his ankle and also sat by the side. So we talked and made up. Otherwise, we would probably have avoided each other. If I hadn't been enough of a glutton to prioritize a lollipop over making sure I knew where my property was, I'd not be friends with my now best friend anymore. Story 14. Butterfly effect? How about the events that led up to the beginning of World War I? Archduke Franz Ferdinand, nephew of Emperor Franz Joseph and heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, traveled to Sarajevo in June 1914 to inspect the Imperial Armed Forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina, former Ottoman territories in the turbulent Balkan region that were annexed by Austria-Hungary in 1908, to the indignation of Serbian nationalists, who believed they should become part of the newly independent and ambitious Serbian nation. On June 28, 1914, Then Franz Ferdinand and Sophie, his wife, were touring Sarajevo in an open car with surprisingly little security when Serbian nationalist Nedeljko Kabrinovic threw a bomb at their car and wounded an officer and some bystanders. Later that day, on the way to visit the injured officer, the Archduke's procession took a wrong turn at the junction of Apple Quay and Franz Josef Strasse when one of Kabrinovic's cohorts, 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, happened to be loitering. Coincidence number 1. Now read that again. The Archduke Ferdinand escaped being terminated when a rebel threw a bomb at his car and missed. Coincidence number 2. Later that day, he decided to go visit the person who was injured in that failed attack. Coincidence number 3. On the way to visit this injured officer, he took a wrong turn and ended up on the wrong street. The Archduke Ferdinand, who has just survived a termination attempt, is out being driven around when he isn't supposed to have been driving atriums. He's on the street that he wasn't supposed to be on because he took a wrong turn. Coincidence number 4. An associate of the would-be termination who threw a bomb at his car that morning and missed just happened to be on the street that Ferdinand accidentally ended up on because Ferdinand took a wrong turn. That guy ended the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Why does this matter? In an event that is widely acknowledged to have sparked the outbreak of World War I, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, nephew of Emperor Franz Joseph and the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, is ended, along with his wife, by a Serbian nationalist in Sarajevo, Bosnia. Story 15. How about Brexit? Small-minded people who didn't understand the implications of their actions very simply put a cross in a box in a polling booth, and now, number 1, UK sovereignty in Gibraltar was directly threatened by Spain. Number 2, the pound went to its lowest level since 1985, dropping twice as far as it did on Black Wednesday, that previous triumph of Tory management of our economy. Number 3, in a single day's trading, the UK stock exchange lost more value than the UK has paid in EU contributions in the entire 43-year history of our membership, with incalculable long-term consequences for millions of pensioners. Number 4, UK sovereignty in Northern Ireland was destabilized by a call for a referendum. Number 5, UK sovereignty in Scotland was destabilized by a call for a referendum. Number 6, UK sovereignty in London, I can hardly believe I'm writing this, was destabilized by a call for UDI for London. Number 7, the first bank intending to pull workers out of the City of London. Number 8, we were given warning of a sharp rise in the cost of petrol at the pump and for a review of their British operations by Airbus. Number 9, we were given warning that the UK is about to lose its AAA credit rating with Standard & Poor. Number 10, the UK PM resigned in advance. Number 11, a motion of no confidence in the leader of the UK opposition was floated. Number 12, Iran, Trump, and Putin started audibly gloating about Brexit. Number 13, David Cameron's much-trumpeted renegotiation deal of March was declared null and void by the EU. Number 14, all that, not to mention the UK's loss of moral standing and even of dignity, in the eyes of other nations thanks to this catastrophically foolish bout of public self-harming, moral and political capital, the hard diplomatic currency of international respect and stature and gravitas, built up over generations, gone in minutes, gone perhaps forever, just like that. And today's lots and lots of Leave voters have told us they didn't really mean it. Story 16. Back in 2011, I left a comment in some random girl's Facebook profile picture. We became friends and dated, and I was introduced to all of her friends, and friends of those friends, and so on. Most of my friends to this day are friends of her friends. One time she came over. She brought a pair of her high heels for me to wear. She thought it would be fun or something. I found out that I actually like wearing high heels, and now, 5 years later, I've got 7 pairs. She was depressed and self-harmed and had some problems as well back then, so I also ended up self-harming because I'm an idiot. So now I've got permanent scars on my arm. We broke up and got kind of angry at each other, so I took revenge. She loved Japan and really wanted to go there, and there were a few songs or bands she loved as well. So I started playing guitar and practiced playing those songs like crazy. And I studied Japanese for a few years and went to Japan and ended up getting a Japanese girlfriend and lots of Japanese friends. Now I've got a nice custom Epiphone Les Paul and I talk with my Japanese friends every day. She wasn't the best student and had a pretty hard time with math and she kept failing classes. We're the same age, but she's like 3 years behind education-wise by now. Back when we broke up, I wanted revenge. I decided I would work and go to a good school and study something very technical and advanced. In high school, I ended up studying math in the highest level, one of the most prestigious high schools in my country, and got the second best grade in the class at the final oral math exam. I also had a full year mainly focused on assembly programming and microprocessors, making robots and circuit boards and other crazy stuff. I then went on to study computing science at one of the best universities in the world, and even though more than half of all students usually drop out because it's too difficult, I'm still going strong. I have an exam on regularity and automations on Monday, and I don't know what she's doing. I think she still has a year of high school left, and almost every single girl I've ever fallen in love with since then looks like her. It's crazy how big of an impact one person can have on your life, and simply just leaving a comment in a person's profile picture can be enough to trigger all of that. Story 17. A bored 15-year-old looking for an anonymous place to discuss his favorite animes and mangas just might cause Donald Trump to be elected as president of the United States. Yes, I think Forchan is playing a big part in making Donald Trump an actual presidential candidate. If you go on /poll, now you'll see 90% of its users are incredibly hateful and nationalistic. Because of its overwhelmingly white, young male population, what started as basically just trolling and attempting to be edgy and offend people, turned into a legitimate online movement with more and more malleable young white males being converted into a borderline extremist far-right cult. When I first visited 4chan almost 5 years ago, I thought the outright prejudice and conservatism was more of a joke and a meme than an actual opinion that many people had. In non-political boards like /co, comics, /sp, sports, and /v, video games, opinions like this were few and far between. Now I hardly go there anymore, but when I do, /poll flows over into these boards more and more. You can't have a thread about international sports without people commenting on the whiteness of a squad. You can't make a post about a video game containing a female or non-white character on /v without being called an SJW. Same with /co. These opinions aren't a result of statistics, education, well-thought ideas, contemplation about the state of society, or anything else but contrarianism. The beta males on 4chan were trying so hard to be edgy and different from the norm that they accidentally created the biggest environment online for far-right prejudiced ideas to thrive. And there's no discussion there, no debate on the issues. It's literally the opinion that gets posted the most and for the longest that reaches the most people. I would guarantee you Trump would not have such a large online presence as it does now if /poll didn't exist. Because everything that happens in 4chan eventually leaks into the rest of the English internet, and now it's leaked onto Reddit too. God help us all if this movement gains more traction. Story 18. Over spring break, my senior year of college, I spent a good deal of time applying for jobs. 2 companies with similar starting salaries and benefits, as well as the same type of requirements, called me the same day. I was hungover and slept through the first call and didn't notice the missed call. I woke up to answer the second. I got an interview and landed the job with the second company. I later heard the first company's voicemail, which was very promising, and I'm very confident that I would have landed that job. The job I passed over was near my ex's hometown. One of the largest strains in our relationship was the lack of her friends and family where I worked, and the other biggie was the lack of jobs in her field. Both would have been mitigated if I'd taken the other job. She grew distant from me and finally made friends with a male coworker. I was left with my own thoughts as she worked overtime with her coworker. I realized how many things she refused to let me do, how many of my dreams she scoffed at and stamped out, how much she controlled me. I didn't need a Zen garden and the coffee table, Jen. I had no room for my drinks and the cat mist in it. Anyway, it was eye-opening. Like, I somehow knew that I was about to be free to pursue those dreams. She had basically checked out and I was finally doing a 180 on fitness. I went from 190 pounds of skinny fat to a lean 155 to a cut but fairly muscular 175. I was set on ditching my mundane desk job for the Marines. While she was cheating on Valentine's Day, I went to the bar. I met the most amazing girl in a fantastic way. That's a story all on its own. I was destined for a boring life with a nasty woman, rotting away behind a desk in upstate New York, gradually getting fatter and no more interesting. Thanks to the couple of drinks that gave me a hangover during spring break, I'm sitting in a bar in lovely SoCal, awaiting a deployment and thinking about my amazing girlfriend. Story 19. If I hadn't eaten too much candy at one time when I was 6, I probably would have ended myself in high school. I ate an entire bag of Haribo gummy bears when I was 6 years old. I love gummy bears. Problem was that I was 6, and a 6-year-old can't handle the Haribo stuff. It was date night for mom and dad, and they had to cancel everything to help me. It took 20 minutes and a spoon to get the log, and then a bath and another hour or two of calming me down and putting me to bed. Because of this, my parents were trying to figure out how to make up this date, and decided, since Mardi Gras was in a few days, they'll have some fun down in Ybor with friends and call for a babysitter, one who would greatly monitor my candy intake. Except my mom got pink eyes. She got pink eyes from handling my mess and probably didn't wash up properly or accidentally touched her clothes before bathing me. Who knows? But my dad was angry he'd miss MG and having fun with his best friends, but told my mom he'd stay with her. She told him to have fun with her friends. She'd be fine. It was the day after that when he went to Mardi Gras and met the woman he cheated on my mom with. And he kept seeing this woman for years, which ballooned over time and caused their divorce when I was 11, which supplemented my excuses for god-awful grades. I was naturally lazy and had terrible work ethic. I did not actually care that my parents were splitting, which made people pity me double hard because I was also an ugly, weird kid with childhood OCD, apparently. I would have been harshly pestered whether my parents divorced or not, but if my parents hadn't split, I would have failed the 7th grade. No Child Left Behind was enacted at the time, so I still had to move on to 8th grade. But I failed the first semester due to laziness and being pestered so hard by students and teachers that I didn't want to come to school, so my grades were garbage, and I failed anyway. Failing was so good for me that it's honestly amazing. I met one of my dearest friends in the 7th grade class I failed down to, and I became a real person again with friends and happy times. Because I failed, my mom moved us from my hometown to my grandma's house for 8th grade, a different middle school where I blossomed even more. I was relatively popular. I had tons of great friends, I did stuff on the weekends and went to the park most days. This pattern of a good life and good friends and experiences continued into high school, even despite severe depression and a growing personality disorder. My support system was solid and flourished under our friendship. As a result, I didn't study as hard and didn't get into a real university. I had to go to community college, where I met my husband. We both were too occupied with each other to go to classes for subjects we didn't care about, and he joined the Navy instead and found a career field he loves and is excited about. If I hadn't eaten a whole bag of gummy bears, then my mom wouldn't have gone pink eyes and my dad wouldn't have gone to Mardi Gras alone and cheated on my mom, so I wouldn't have had an excuse to be lazy in 6th grade. No one would have pitied me and gave me a pass for my behavior, and I wouldn't have been able to foster my lazy attitude. If I hadn't failed, then I would have had my freshman year at my hometown high school, and my mom wouldn't have wanted me to move schools. A very important issue for her. Hometown high school would have been full of my pre-failure pesters who absolutely would have continued to pester me. I wouldn't have the resources or support system to cope with my various inevitable mental illnesses, and absolutely would have gone insane under the pressure of it all. I wouldn't be alive today if I hadn't eaten those gummy bears. Story 20. Why am I always so late to these? I grew up in the Midwest and my now wife grew up in the Northeast. For a little backstory, I was working a desk job in the IT department and was getting awfully bored with it, so I put my resume on Career Builder. Nothing new and interesting came through for a while, so it just remained on there for at least a year. And by that time, I would just auto-delete the emails without reading them. Probably one per week. For Christmas, about 6 years ago, my parents wanted to take the whole family on a cruise aboard a Royal Caribbean ship. We had a blast. And the whole time we joked and did the touristy things like, oh, I could work on a ship like this, or I could live here. Fast forward to my returning to work, and a few days after, I received a generic email from Career Builder saying someone was interested in me, and I saw the company name as subject. It was for another major cruise line, and they wanted to know if I would be interested in managing their onboard servers or graphics, etc. After a 5-month application process, I was approved and ready to go and begin my 6-month contract. The only catch was, the guy I was supposed to be replacing came back for another contract, so they offered me a position waiting tables in the formal dining room since I'd already gone through the process. Sure, why not? I actually ended up having so much fun with the waitstaff, I would have never gone to sit in a server room by myself if they offered it to me again. If I remember correctly, there were about 1,200 crew, 800 of which were waiters and bartenders, and the passenger capacity was around 2,600. Anyway, I'm almost done with my contract, and about 3 weeks before I was due to fly out for vacation, I met a girl that had just signed on to begin her contract as a waiter. We were inseparable, and she ended up jumping ship halfway through her contract and moved in with me back in the Midwest. She moved back northeast after a few months, and we did the long-distance thing for a bit, but ended up getting married a year and a half ago on the beach. There we had our first date. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.